Women being less than men is the oldest prejudice in the book. For most of human history, women have been considered to be less than men, for both psychological and physical reasons. However, thanks to many movements like the feminist movement, women have been slowly able to gain a spot in society. Today, you would think that something like misogyny doesn't exist, and that for most countries, women are treated equally like men, but that is not the case. If you think about it, not that long ago, most women weren't able to vote. And not that long ago, most women weren't able to work in men-dominated areas. Today, a lot of those things are possible, but society still has a stigma towards women and if they work in those areas or not. Now, if you go back to not that long ago, women have been considered to, in some sort of way, be equal to men and being able to apply to the same jobs as men, but they have also been considered to not be qualified for those positions. They have also a lot of stigmas and a lot of rules in order to be accepted in society or to be successful. This means that feminism is also considered something radical, something aggressive, and something violent, which has made many women drift apart from the thoughts of feminism. If it weren't for feminism, I wouldn't be able to be filming this video right now, or wearing the clothes I wear, or going to college. As someone who was born and raised in a Latin American country, I am aware that misogyny is much more prominent there. But it doesn't mean that it isn't also prominent here in the United States. Which is why I've come to realize that there are many different ways in which misogyny is still a thing, both in first world and third world countries. Social media has been a huge influence on how misogyny is treated today. Many women today drift apart from the idea of feminism and would rather be considered something different, something that appeals more to men. Something like the new term tradwife, which means traditional wife. Now, what does a traditional wife mean? According to the new trends on TikTok and Instagram, a traditional wife is someone who sticks more to the values of a conservative traditional household, in which the woman stays at home, takes care of the children, cleans the house, and waits for her husband for dinner. The issue with this term is that many women on TikTok today have been filming themselves arguing how good it is to become a traditional wife and how it's better. Now, if you want to be a traditional wife, you have to stick with everything that comes along with being a traditional wife. In the 1950s and 1960s, women were being traditional wives because they were waiting for their husbands to come from war, because they were serving the country during those wars. Many women back in that era suffered a lot of physical, verbal, and psychological abuse from their husbands, which means that if you want to be a traditional wife, you should just stick to all of the values. If you want to have that lifestyle, it's okay. But just remember that thanks to many movements is the reason why you can film yourself on TikTok talking about why you can be a trade wife. If it were back in the days, you wouldn't have even been able to raise up your voice to speak on something like a traditional wife household. The concept of trad wife just means that you are there to serve your husband, which basically goes to the fact, once again, that a woman is just there to please a man. It is not empowering, it is just wanting to drift apart from women just for the idea to please men. The wonderful thing about feminism is that it's not that you shouldn't marry or you shouldn't get pregnant. It's that you should only if you want. And you should do these things because you love to do them. On the other hand, as I mentioned before, I was born and raised in a Latin American country. In my case, it was Colombia. And this country is, of course, known for a lot of beautiful things, but it is also very prominent in misogyny. In the past few years, it has obviously gained an evolution, but it has also leaned into a very similar pattern like the United States, which is try to camouflage misogyny through social media with a lot of different terms. However, it is sort of different. As it is well known, Colombia has gone through a rough history in the past 40 years. Drug trafficking and narcos have been something that sadly affects our history. I am mentioning this because a term that is very frequently used lately is the term narcobelleza. Today, women in Colombia have to go through a certain type of process in order to be considered beautiful or be considered successful. And most of these things in the past were considered to be associated with narco traffic and drug culture. Around 20 years ago, it was very common to see little girls want to dream about being better, growing up, and just becoming successful. Sadly, if you were someone that didn't have that many resources, it was known that you could just go through the easy way and go through the drug trafficking way. this affected a lot of men, but it also affected a lot of women, because a lot of men really wanted to add to their whole luxurious life of this dangerous world that they're in. They wanted a lot of women, and they wanted these women to look in a very specific way. Hourglass body, perfect face, which sadly can only be gained through things like plastic surgery. Little girls will just dream about getting their boob job or getting their nose fixed so they could just be considered something valuable and stay with a man who would maintain her, who back then would have been a drug lord. Today, things have changed, and now it doesn't only include drug lords, but it includes anyone in general. However, the beauty standard of a Colombian woman still stays the same, and it means to have a very unrealistic body and a very unrealistic face that you can only gain through plastic surgery, meaning you can only gain it through money. The issue with this in social media and in the modern world is that a lot of women are glorifying it and painting it as you are just a woman of high value who needs to have a man who can keep up with your expenses. At first sight, this might seem something very powerful, but it just once again goes around men, around a man who has to pay you for everything, do everything for you, and the only thing you have to do is to do your surgeries, be pretty, and be maintained. Glorifying this just encourages little girls to not want to continue school, just to drop it out so you can and only focus on wanting to be considered attractive and to only be reduced to an object. The reason why I am comparing these two terms is so we can realize that misogyny is still there. Even if it feels like things have changed, there still isn't a place for women that's in the same status as men. And even if we're slowly trying to get to that point, it is important to remember that you as a woman have to have that idea that you are equal to men. I know that it is a hard path and I know that it is difficult, but it is extremely important that we remember that we are equal and not normalize it because social media is telling us to normalize it. Let's just think about all these things and how in many parts of the world there's still misogyny and we can still see it very obviously, and we should just not influence other younger generations to follow older generations' steps when they could do something really different for themselves, and we can also do something different for ourselves.